Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for a virtual talk, in her own words, an intimate view of Virginia's unsung women in civil rights by LaTika Lee. I'm just going to give a brief welcome. My name is Carlene Kowalczyk. I am the Executive Director of the Louisa County Historical Society. And thank our sponsors before I will turn it over to Ray Bird with the Louisa chapter of the NAACP, who will introduce our speaker. So first, I'd like to just thank the Community Foundation for Charlottesville Area Community Foundation and Virginia Humanities. They are both sponsors of our African American History Initiative, which this program is just one part of that. And this program is a joint effort between the Louisa County Historical Society and the Louisa NAACP. We also have some other sponsors that we would like to thank as I welcome Ray to the screen. All right. And bear with us for just one moment. Something's changed with the online program that we used since the last time. So just bear with us for 1 second. All right. So I have a question for the audience. Things are looking a little bit different to us than they have in the past. Can everyone see and hear Ray and I, or can you just hear us? Okay, you can see and hear us. It's interesting because we can't see us. Ray, if you would go ahead. I know that we can't see each other, but the audience can see and hear us. I'm sorry, just bear with us for just one more moment. There you are. There's Ray. I can see you now. Can you hear me?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ray Bird. I'm the Vice President of the local Louisa NAACP branch. Sorry about the little technical difficulties we're having here this morning. But I wanted to invite everybody. This is our joint programming with the Louisa Historical Society. Our branch wanted to do something past the month of February and keep it going. So, we're putting together these virtual programs that we're going to be having month by month. And hopefully when we get to the point where we're able to gather together, we can do that as well. But we wanted to emphasize the importance of African-American culture, African-American heritage, enrichment, and also oral tradition. And we're bringing different presenters in, giving them the opportunity to talk about some really wonderful things that have went on in our history, African-American history throughout Virginia, throughout the country, and just really, just talk about the importance of that. So today we're just glad to have our oral history coordinator from the Louisa Historical Society, Ms. LaTika King. Today she's going to to be discussing hidden figures in plain sight. We'll talk about African American women who played an important role in the civil rights movement from here, locally in Central Virginia. So, LaTika, we'd like to thank you for coming, and we welcome you, and the stage is yours.
All right, Ray. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? All righty then. Thank you. Thank you, Ray, and to the Louisa NAACP and to the Louisa County Historical Society. My name is LaTika Lee, and I am the Oral History Coordinator. I'd like to welcome you today as well and say thank you to my parents, Ernestine Mitchell and the late Thomas Johnson, the class of 1965, and all of the freedom fighters and freedom writers. It's because of them, it's because of you that I am inspired to do this presentation today. As some of you may know, this week is very historic. It's the anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, and as well as the social justice protests that erupted last year across Virginia and the world. And so I dedicate this presentation to those who continue to fight the good fight, as the late Congressman John Lewis said, and get into good trouble. So throughout this presentation, I will ask you some questions, and hopefully you will be able to insert an answer into the chat. And if you have a question, you can enter it into the chat, and we will take questions at the end as well. So my first question is, what do you think when you hear the words hidden figures? In this photograph, you'll see a group of women with the title In Plain Sight of today's presentation, In Plain Sight. So what do you think of when you hear the words hidden figures? If you would put that in the chat. In today's talk, we will explore the contributions, experiences, and roles of Black women during the 1950s and 60s. You will hear the terms colored, Negro, Black, African American, and people of color intermixed throughout as forms of identity to reflect our progress and debunk race as a social construct. You'll also hear uplifting stories of resilience, joy, and triumph. So some of the words that's in the chat include forgotten contributors in history. So we will address that today. For decades, women played an active role in the Black freedom struggle in Virginia. They participated in political meetings and organized grassroots campaigns seeking full American citizenship. Next slide. Here is a timeline of some of the activities and events that took place during the civil rights movement. In this timeline is truncated to begin with 1947 and goes through 1970. Next slide, please. Women joined political rallies in Danville to protest discrimination in municipal government, employment, and public facilities. Next. They attended mass meetings at local churches such as Bethel AME in Farmville, where they planned strategies to gain the right for equal facilities in schools. They resisted racially restrictive housing covenants in Charlottesville and in Albemarle County. Next. This is a racially restrictive housing covenant, and in it, where you see the highlight, it highlighted racial groups who were not deemed appropriate to buy housing in certain neighborhoods across the United States. Barriers of segregation were also broken down in Lynchburg. And here is a map of Lynchburg and where it's outlined with some of those restrictive covenants. So women were covert, unapologetic agents of change who wanted dignity, to be treated fairly, with respect and decent humanity. Whether laundresses, maids, seamstresses, or cooks, women were actively engaged in boycotts, marches, and demonstrations. Students like 16-year-old Barbara Johns led a student strike in 1951 to protest the substandard conditions at R.R. Moulton High School in Farmville. But in spite of their hard work, many people didn't see them. They were hidden figures in plain sight. After all, it was Black men who led the civil rights organizations and set the agenda, right? Yet women played a significant role in getting the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed, guaranteeing equal voting rights for African Americans, as well as the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Negro women stood beside Negro men in fighting racial discrimination and prejudice, but the unique challenges that they faced were overlooked. If you could go back to the previous slide. Thank you. The intersectionality of race and gender affected colored women's rights and opportunities. But they were resilient. Excuse me. They used their human agency to exercise control over their life, despite their circumstances, with unequal access to jobs, fair housing, and higher education. Next, please. And teachers in the movement, such as Ciola Wright, a French teacher at A.G. Richardson High School in Louisa, used their classrooms as larger platforms to promote their ideas, expose students to culture, Negro history, encourage hope, and instill pride in their students. Mrs. Wright's husband, Edward Skippy Wright, was a part of the duo team deemed the Louisa Two, who integrated the lunch counter at Clark's drugstore. Next. There were many colored schools across the county of Louisa, and this map, which is a resource at the museum at the Historical Society, shows where those schools were located. Next. Louisa County homemakers Maddie Mcgee and Inez Mcgee, who were sisters-in-law, are remembered for requesting equitable funding from the county school board. Next. They, along with other parents, beginning as early in the 1930s, sought equal appropriation for books, indoor restrooms, gravel, and school buses. And in this document, there are several citizens in Louisa who signed a petition asking for more funding. This is a picture of Maddie Mcgee and Inez Mcgee, at A.G. Richardson High School. But whether inside or outside the classroom, teachers were nurturing and fostered a learning environment of firm instruction, tutoring, mentoring, and community work, which were instrumental forms of activism that influenced the movement. Next. Pioneering educators like Sarah Winston, Alberta Despot, and Z.C. Morton espoused the qualities of self-determination, freedom, democracy, and excellence that they expected in their students. Two of these women had elementary schools named for them locally. They were, next slide, Z.C. Morton Elementary and Alberta Despot, which is now Trevilian's Elementary. In support of local organizations, their crusade to support equal pay for teachers, NAACP General Counsel Thurgood Marshall, who would later be appointed Justice to the United States Supreme Court, traveled multiple times to Virginia to argue the plight of teachers. In the fight for racial equality, every area of life was segregated. In many ways, two parallel universes existed in the South and in Central Virginia, one white and one black. Since agriculture was vitally important to white and black farmers in Louisa, segregated 4-H clubs flourished across the county. Members met to give demonstrations on projects and skills they were learning, including sewing, cooking, canning, raising chickens, and hogs. In this photo, there are campers at 4-H camp during the summer. But African American clubs were run by a separate system of Black agricultural colleges and extension agents who earned significantly less than their white counterparts. Next. During the summer, youth earned the privilege to a week's camp experience at Virginia State College, which is now Virginia State University. White youth were based at Virginia Tech. This photo is an image of girls in 1955. It was taken by Christine Thomason, who was an elementary teacher for many years, and she was married to the late businessman and mortician John Thomason. Christine came from Roanoke to Louisa in the early 1950s and earned a degree in home economics. She worked as a home demonstration agent and supervised the clubs across the county. And those interactions that the kids had offered recreation, skill building, friendship, and innovations in agriculture. Next. For nearly 30 years, a guide called the Negro Motorist Green Book, which was published by Victor Green, and after his death, his wife Alma Green, he was a postal carrier in New York City. The guide provided African Americans with advice on safe places to eat, sleep, and relax when they traveled in the U.S. and abroad during segregation. The guide was an invaluable asset in dodging danger because of segregation. And it was not only just in the South, but throughout the United States. Black travelers not only met with the inconvenience and humiliation of being turned away from businesses, but also had to be mindful of the threat of racist violence, including lynching. Next. In this slide, this is an ad placement in the Green Book, which lets you know why they actually printed it. And the Green Book was based off earlier publications, similar publications for Jewish citizens. In Virginia state capital of Richmond, Rest a Bit was the go-to spot for a ladies' beauty parlor. Hidden Figures, excuse me. Hidden Figures with the unassuming title of Beautician provided a safe space for relaxation from the everyday stress of looking over their shoulders, but they also played a central role in the civil rights movement. Civil rights organizers ran workshops that trained them in civil disobedience and voter registration. Next. Taking a look at this slide in the chat, which house do you think might have been a tea room, a hidden place where people could rest and relax in a safe space during segregation? This is a hidden spot located in the city of Richmond, which was located in the Green Book. Out of these houses that you see in the chat, which house do you think could be a tea room? Any of them could be a tea room. That's what the answers are in the chat. The first or the second. Okay. Well, we will see in just a moment. The hidden figures is not only people, right? They're also places. So here in this photo, you'll see tourist homes, which were like bed and breakfasts or Airbnbs today, except there wasn't any internet or cell phones where you could call ahead and make a reservation, and not every home was listed. So let's see if Caleb is right, if it's near the blue car. If you could go to the next slide. So this hidden house, which is not really hidden, is in, you see the gaps? Okay. Yes, there are gaps within the houses. Some of them are connected. This is in the Jackson Ward area of Richmond. And the house was located at 519 North 1st Street. So it was the house that was in the middle, which was in plain sight. So although some of the houses were not, some were listed in the Green Book, some weren't listed in the Green Book, but one woman who did place ads in the book was Mrs. Lucy Partillo Brown. Next, she operated the Mountain View Inn, which was a summer resort for African Americans in Crozet, and she advertised for 25 years. Her ads were listed next to ads for Hampton Institute and Madam C.J. Walker's College of Beauty Culture in The Crisis, which is the official magazine of the NAACP, which still operates today. So after World War II, with the infrastructure boom in the 1950s, interstate highways were being constructed nationwide, and from Seattle to Chicago to Baltimore, African American communities across the country were impacted, and highways were routed directly through Black and Brown communities. And in cities like Richmond, redlining crushed housing options, and Interstate I-95 divided the historic African American neighborhood of Jackson Ward, which I just showed you in the previous slide. So there, however, were more than one books directed to African Americans to help them when they traveled. The Green Book aimed to capture all the accommodations open to Black travelers, but Travel Guide, as you see here in this 1952 publication, was published by the NAACP from 1947 to 1957. And in it, politics were discussed and issues about traveling safety and access to accommodations, and a larger effort for civil rights during Jim Crow. It empowered African Americans to be more mobile, especially after building new lives after the Great Migration. Next. In Chesterfield County, the Coldbrook Motel stood as a beacon for Black motorists seeking safe harbor. It was located 8 miles north of Petersburg on Route 1. And in this ad, this is an ad for the Coldbrook Inn, and it offers good food and comfortable cabins located on U.S. Highway number 1. Let's see, 15 miles south of Richmond. Next. This is an example from Travel Guide, and it lists cities all across Virginia, including Arlington, Charlottesville, Hampton, Lexington, Richmond, and London Bridge. Next. It was an upscale, safe space that was also a hidden meeting space owned by Cortland Colson and William Brooks. So that's how they came up with the name Coldbrook. They combined their names of Colson and Brooks to come up with the name for the motel, the Coldbrook Motel. His wife, Mr. Brooks's wife, Audrey, was an educator at Virginia State College who connected the two men and also employed teenagers at the motel. At its height in the 1960s, it was wives and mothers, aunts and sisters behind the scenes of the movement. Only minutes away from the Coldbrook Motel was a young mother named Teresa Walker. She was protecting her children against the threats on her life and harassing phone calls. Next. So just a few minutes away from the Coldbrook Motel is Colonial Heights and then Petersburg. And that's where Teresa Walker was. She was a young mother who protected her children against the threats on her life and was born in New Jersey. She was taught never to accept mistreatment. Next slide. This is a photo of the Walker family. After high school, Teresa entered Virginia Union University and met Wyatt Walker. That's where they discovered that both of them were from New Jersey. Teresa knew Walker's sister first and then met him. When she became engaged to him, little did she know that she would later be engaged in the movement. They were married in December 1950, and through 1955, their family quickly grew to 4 children in 5 years. Teresa would become a first lady and join her husband in the fight for social justice. Next. Mrs. Walker filed the first federal civil lawsuit attacking segregated schools in Petersburg, which sought an injunction against Virginia's Pupil Placement Act. Her daughter, Patty, was a first grader when she was banned from all Virginia schools and had to be taught at home instead. So in one of his more public acts of resistance, Teresa's husband, Wyatt Walker, entered the Petersburg Public Library in 1960 and asked to check out a biography of the Confederate General Robert E. Lee. He was arrested, fined $100, and sentenced to 30 days for organizing the demonstration. With the Petersburg Improvement Association, the SCLC, the NAACP, and CORE, Petersburg was the epicenter of the civil rights movement in Virginia. The seeds of the struggle were planted in Virginia State students like Dorothy Cotton. She also attended Guilford Baptist Church, the same historic church led by Wyatt Walker. Dorothy Cotton was a grassroots organizer who aided Dr. Walker by protesting segregation at the library, at lunch counters, and she taught direct action tactics to students. Her job was to teach them how to correctly picket and march for the movement. These campaigns gave her experience to lead the Citizen Education Program, which was training meant to help colored people register to vote and pass the literacy test that disenfranchised millions of Blacks. Next. So while Petersburg was the epicenter, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. took notice, and he offered Reverend Walker a position at the SCLC, which was headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. He insisted on bringing Dorothy Cotton and Jim Wood along with his family. Dorothy would later go on to serve as a national NAACP officer. And in this slide, you'll see this is a route for the Freedom Rides. In May of 1961, Teresa was seated next to her husband and became an active member in the Freedom Rides, which was an effort to end segregation on interstate bus travel in the Deep South. Here you'll see that they started in Washington, D.C., they came through Richmond and Petersburg, and then headed further south. On one leg of the trips from Atlanta, Dr. Walker and Teresa were jailed among dozens of participants. Next slide. This is a mugshot of Teresa, Mrs. Walker, who was arrested in Jackson, Mississippi for protesting segregation. And actually, this week is an anniversary, as I mentioned earlier, of those rides 60 years ago. The Freedom Riders faced angry mobs, police arrests, brutal conditions behind bars, and fire bombs. There was a huge firebomb with one of the buses. So Mrs. Walker, I met her a few years ago, and she gave me her reflections on her arrest. And she wrote out some notes. And in this slide, what you're seeing is an artifact that was on exhibit at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture in 2019, which is a reminder of the role that women played in the movement. This is, it was entitled Freedom Cup, which was a tin cup that Mrs. Walker used while she was in the Hinds County Jail. Next. In this slide, this is an outline of what the jail looked like, the layout for the women on the women's side of the jail. So the wife in mother duties not only included cooking and cleaning, but also sacrificing career opportunities, life endangerment, violence, eviction from housing, redlining, unemployment, sexual assault, as well as death. Next. In this slide is an article, a news article on the arrest of the Walkers, as well, Dr. White T. Walker and Teresa Walker, as well as Dr. Milton Reed of Petersburg, who was the president of the Virginia Christian Leadership Conference. So our next hidden figure is Helen Palmer. From an early age, Helen Palmer took life by the reins. She rode horses bareback on the family farm in the valley. She was born in Goshen and had an unbridled passion for learning. She graduated from Virginia State College in early education and also joined nearby historic Gilfield Baptist Church. That is the same congregation and church where Wyatt T. Walker had been called to preach. Next slide. He became not only her pastor, but also her mentor. In 1955, he officiated Helen's wedding to James Howard, shown in this photo, who was a sheet metal and roofing entrepreneur. Together, they were newlyweds fighting for racial equality. So what's the connection? The connection is that Virginia State College, now Virginia State University, was a hub for students as well as a resource for the community surrounding Chesterfield County as well as Petersburg. Helen was a mother, a Girl Scout leader, and a NAACP youth advisor. She directed the NAACP Youth Choir, organized trainings for sit-ins, and focused on voter registration. She expected a lot from her students and would often say, "You can do more than you think you can." On her state youth advisor business card, there was a quote displayed from scientist and inventor George Washington Carver that stated, "Start where you are with what you have. Make something of it and never become satisfied." Helen Palmer Howard was a teacher by day and donned a cape after dark. She drove a 1955 pink and gray Chevy on the dangerous Virginia byways during the week. So during the week, she chartered new chapters and graded papers when she got back home late into the night. Next. Helen was a tireless hidden figure. On Saturdays, she organized voter registration drives. Next. She got membership in the NAACP and got students to be involved in the Get Out the Vote campaign, GOTV. In this photo is Helen in the center, and she is at the Virginia State NAACP conference. In this photo, she is with Executive Secretary Lester Banks, and Governor Linwood Holton. At the NAACP National Convention in 1970, Helen was selected as the most outstanding advisor in the nation. But she was also an activist, mentor, advocate, and mother. Our next hidden figure in Virginia civil rights is Elizabeth Johnson Rice. She was born in Washington, D.C., and grew up in Lawrenceville. Her mother was an educator and her father was a dentist. But despite her relatively affluent surroundings, Betty, which is what she was known as a youth, still felt the humiliation of segregation. While the white kids rode the bus across town, she and her friends had to walk to school. And if white kids were on that side of the street, they had to cross and walk on the other side because they were deemed not good enough to occupy the same side of the sidewalk. Next. Later, Betty would matriculate to Virginia Union University. She was inspired by campus visits from Dr. King and the Reverend Ralph Abernathy to get involved with the struggle for civil rights. Her mother, who was a professor at Virginia Union at that time, tried to discourage her from getting caught up in everything. But Betty, she didn't want to. She didn't obey. But her mom didn't want Betty to get hurt. Next. Betty attended rallies and occasionally introduced speakers from the SCLC and became involved with SNCC. That's the group that Norfolk native and NAACP officer Ella Baker co-founded. Ella Baker was born in Norfolk. She was a key figure who stressed the importance of young people and women in the movement. Betty was trained in nonviolent resistance, learning to take slaps and not slap back. But her world began to change on February 1st, 1960, when 4 North Carolina A&T college students staged a sit-in at a Woolworth's lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. This sparked a wave of other sit-ins in college towns across the South. Less than 3 weeks later, Elizabeth, along with her brother Ford and 32 other Virginia Union students, marched into Thalhimer's department store in Richmond and sat down at the whites-only lunch counter. This is her brother Ford. Blacks couldn't even try on clothes there. They much less take a seat at and eat at the lunch counter. So when the police wagons arrived on the scene, officers were clutching the leashes of German shepherds and ordering the students to leave. But they didn't. They refused. They refused to move as the dogs went about sniffing them up and down. Next. The police took them into custody and charged the picketers with trespassing and escorted them without incident to jail. They were bailed out about an hour later, and upon leaving, the students were met by hundreds of supporters outside who shouted how proud they were that they had stood up. Elizabeth later remembered Broad Street being lined with Black people for blocks and blocks. And among the crowd, she spotted her parents. The students became known as the Richmond 34. Their case was appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which ruled in their favor in 1963, mandating desegregation in all public accommodations. Elizabeth's story doesn't end there, however. This is a historic marker in Richmond on Broad Street in front of the former Tallheimer's department store. Next. After graduation, Elizabeth married Richard Rice and earned a master's degree from Virginia State. When the state of Virginia desegregated the school system, she became the first Black teacher to teach white students in Petersburg. But that's where she met with the worst racism. Next, on her first day on the job, which is depicted in this yearbook from 1968, white parents and students crowded the steps leading into the school. In this photo, the picture is a Black student. As Elizabeth walked towards the steps, the crowd began to split. And she remembered it was like Moses parting the Red Sea. But moments later, she encountered a rude surprise on the chalkboard when she walked into her classroom. Next. So this is a picture of Elizabeth and a photo from the yearbook, Petersburg High School in 1968. Next. This is what she walked into in her classroom that was on the board. It read, "The KKK is going to lynch you. Who do you think you are?" Elizabeth recalled telling herself, "All right, I have to really make my case here before erasing the board. I told my students I'm not here to win a popularity contest. I don't care how you feel about me, but you will respect me, and I will teach you, if you are teachable. And with that, let's get started. My name is Elizabeth Johnson Rice." Next. So from civil rights to voting rights to equal rights, the civil rights movement was one phase in the longer Black freedom struggle that began when the first Africans arrived in Virginia in 1619. Did you know that the NAACP filed more lawsuits in Virginia than any other state? Many of the most important legal landmark cases of the movement originated in Virginia. From Irene Morgan to Evelyn Butts to Dorothy Height, women had to be prepared to go to jail, be beaten, or killed. They lived and worked during an era when the concept of Black inferiority was the accepted rule. Jim Crow laws were legal and challenged by few people, Black or white. So the brave women that we've talked about today, it's because of their efforts that we have so many freedoms. And what they wanted was human dignity. They wanted equal schools. They wanted equal access. And it's because of them and their sacrifices that today we enjoy our freedoms and liberty. They confronted racial prejudice as well as economic, political, and social challenges to create the social change that we benefit from now. So this is an examination of their lives, and we have, hopefully you have seen that they are no longer hidden. They are right here in our faces. Some of these women are still living, and we can hear their stories today of how they persevered with faith, courage, and conviction. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now. If you have any comments or questions, would you please put them in the chat?
I'm going to change the slide to show your contact information, LaTika, in case anybody wants to contact you about the oral history project.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. I appreciate that. Carlene, while we're waiting for questions, would you let them know about the project?
Yes, thank you. So LaTika Lee is our oral history coordinator at the Louisa County Historical Society, and we work with Marilyn Campbell, who I think is also on this session, and she's our grant program manager, and Gabby Whitfield, who was our student intern. And we're currently working on 3 projects this year. A Freedom of Choice Remembrance Project to document the experiences of the first 13 Black students who integrated Louisa County High School in 1965. An oral history project to continue to gather Black voices from Louisa County to increase African American representation in our archives. And Gabby is currently researching how we can best integrate local Black history into our local school curriculum. And she's reaching out to local teachers and administrators and other stakeholders to figure out what kind of resources would best benefit our local community and how can we develop those. So if anyone's interested in learning more about them or getting involved, you can contact LaTika about oral histories and Marilyn about the projects in general. And of course, you can always contact me as well. And I'd like to thank Ray, the Louisa County NAACP for bringing this program series into existence, for coming to us and asking us to do it. We have had a great time so far. And next month, please register for Saturday, June 26th at 10 a.m. Dr. Jawan Johnson, who is a research fellow for the Lemon Project at William & Mary, will be talking about his dissertation, which is about the erasure of Black culture and church burnings in the Obama era. And it looks like we do have a question, LaTika.
Yes. Okay. So one of the questions was about the resources used. And so some of the resources are available at the society through their archives. Can you talk about the archives?
Yeah. So we do have about 1% of our collection available online. I'm typing the link into that website right now. We're currently undergoing a larger project. We just successfully raised funds to make more of our archives available online. But you can also visit our main website, which is louisahistory.org. And on there, if you click on the research tab, you can download our catalog, and you can either come in person or we can scan and send you any items that have not been digitized yet. But I do know that some of the material that LaTika used was from that PiedmontVAhistory.org website, which is our current digital archive website.
Yes. And so that's where they can find information about the schools. Would you please also put the link in the chat?
Yes. And so we have a separate website called louisaheritage.org, and that is an online exhibit dedicated to the African American schools of Louisa County before segregation. And there's a lot of great information on that website.
Thank you. I think I addressed those two.
I see a question. Did any of the family fight for the schools getting renamed? If you know of.
So I don't know, but through the website, there are various descriptions of how some of them were named, and as well as the teachers who instructed the students before integration.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, LaTika. It was a wonderful presentation. We're very lucky to have you as our oral history coordinator and as our presenter today. Ray, is there anything you wanted to say before we close it out for the day? Oh, I think you're on mute.
There we go. I'd just like to thank LaTika for being able to come and speak to us today. It was great. It was a lot of great information. And I think everybody enjoyed it. So again, just to welcome everybody back June 26th for our next presentation. We'll be sending out some notifications with the registration link for that. We want to continue to build this, and we want to continue to get more people involved because there's some really good going on and partner together with the Louisa Historical Society. And again, I just want to thank you guys, the Louisa Historical Society, as well, for coming to partner with us for this.
So thank you for this opportunity once again. If you know of someone who should be included, or if you have information about any activities or events, or if you have artifacts that you'd like to donate to the Historical Society, please email me at louisaoralhistory@gmail.com. We're looking for candidates for interviews for our collections.